Lieutenant Hallie Voss moved quietly through the smoke and ash of the burning slave compound. The air thick with the sharp stench of scorched metal and fear. Her squad was gone, dead, captured, or too far to help hand. The only thing keeping her alive was her skill, her silence, and the thin layer of shadow clinging to the crumbled walls. The mission had failed, the extraction window had closed, and her only goal now was survival. Around her, the alien Varnak soldiers barked orders in their harsh tongue, dragging weak and broken figures from cages like they were trash. She had no business being here anymore, but as she ducked behind a ruined support beam, a sound stopped her whimper, not from fear, but pain, and not human. She turned, pulse racing, and saw him. He was chained, half buried beneath debris, clearly beaten close to death. His skin was a strange mix of human brown and Varnak silver blue, and his face bore both their traits: rounded jaw, but those unmistakable black vertical slit eyes of the Varnak, a hybrid, rare, illegal. He didn't beg. He didn't speak. He only looked at her like he expected her to pass by, like he had already died a long time ago. Hallie should have moved on. Orders were clear: stealth first. Don't engage. Don't interfere, especially not with non-priority assets. But something in his eyes held her. Not a plea, but a challenge. She crouched, pulling out her blade, not to strike, but to break the chain binding his wrist. He flinched, but didn't resist. The chain snapped with a metallic crack, and she whispered, "Follow me." He stood shakily, tall despite his wounds, and kept pace as they weaved through the ruins. A patrol passed close, and they ducked together into a narrow alley. She could feel his breath trembling, but he made no sound. They reached a collapsed wall, and Hallie knelt to adjust her beacon, her last chance to call for help. "I shouldn't be doing this," she muttered, more to herself. "Why are you even here?" The hybrid didn't answer, but he touched her arm, gently, then pointed to a nearby building. She glanced over and saw a hidden console tech, a data cache. Maybe this whole place wasn't just a prison, it was hiding something. Before she could decide what to do, a shout rang out. They'd been seen. Blasters fired, stone exploded, and Hallie grabbed the hybrid's hand, yanking him forward as they ran. They ducked and sprinted, weaving through the chaos, and just as Hallie thought they might make it, a stun round struck her shoulder. She fell, dazed. The hybrid stopped, turned, and stood over her as Varnak soldiers closed in. He didn't run. He roared loud. Alien, terrifying cant, tackled the first guard. Kaylee, blinking through the haze, saw him fight with fury and precision, like someone trained, not just desperate. More soldiers swarmed. He turned back to her, bleeding, and pushed something into her hand, a small Varnak data crystal, blinking with light. Then he shoved her into a storm drain and slammed the grate behind her. "Go," he rasped, the first word he ever spoke. She did. Crawling through filth and fire, she emerged miles away, barely alive, but free. The rescue ship found her, by signal, hours later. She said nothing about the hybrid, not to her commander, not in the debrief. She kept the crystal and the memory. Years later, she would wonder what became of him, whether he had died in that compound or escaped into the stars. She never knew his real name, Achi. He had given him one in that brief moment before the world turned to firecale. Hallie Voss stood behind the thick glass of her cell, staring at the swirling blue clouds of Varnakar Prime, a planet she had once fought to destroy and now faced death upon. The irony tasted bitter in her mouth. Years had passed since the war ended, but peace came with strange chains. The United Earth Nations and the Varnak Dominion had formed an uneasy alliance, stitched together by politics, trade, and fear. Heroes of the war, like Hallie, were now treated as obstacles, reminders of a bloody past, no one wanted to remember. She had been a respected commander, decorated and praised, until she refused an order to silence a group of Varnak civilians who had seen something they shouldn't have. That one decision, guided by her conscience, had turned the Alliance against her. Now, the same leaders who once shook her hand had signed the order for her execution, calling her a war criminal to satisfy their new alien partners. Her trial had been a performance, held in a cold chamber filled with Varnak officials and human diplomats too eager to please. Evidence was ignored. Witnesses were silenced. The sentence was clear public execution by blade, a Varnak tradition, meant to symbolize honor and final justice. She would be the first human executed on Varnakar Prime, and the media spun it as a gesture of unity, a show that even Earth's war criminals would answer to the new peace. But Hallie knew better. It was politics. It was betrayal. She stood in silence as the guards, tall and insect-like in their armored suits, led her through the shining halls of the Varnak High Court. Citizens gathered, thousands of them, whispering, staring, some curious, some angry, none kind. She didn't lower her eyes. If this was her end, she would meet it with pride. The execution platform was wide and circular, made of dark stone with glowing veins of red light beneath it. The sky above was a pale green, and two suns hung low, casting long shadows. At the center stood the Blade of Remembrance, a massive, curved stone slab held by an ancient machine. The Varnak called it sacred. It would fall in silence and end her life in a single, crushing strike. She was led to the platform, her wrists bound by magnetic cuffs, and forced to kneel beneath the stone. A voice began to speak, old Varnak elder, reciting the words of judgment. She tuned it out, focusing instead on the faces in the crowd. No one she knew, no one who cared, except one figure near the edge, cloaked, still, almost hidden. Something about the stance struck her, familiar, but her thoughts were broken as the elder's voice grew louder. The ceremony reached its final line. The guards activated the machine. The stone began to rise, slow and heavy, glowing red as it prepared to fall. The crowd held its breath. Hallie looked up, not afraid, but wondering what had truly brought her here. Was it justice, revenge, or something far deeper, buried in the lies of peace? The stone reached its peak. The elder spoke the final word. The machine hissed in, the stone dropped, but it never hit. In a blink, the cloaked figure from the crowd leapt forward with impossible speed. It's a flash of light, a blur of motion, and the stone stopped mid-fall. It quivered in the air, held back by something, someone. Gasps filled the plaza. Varnak guards moved in, weapons raised, but the figure threw back the cloak. Hallie's heart stopped. It was him, Kale, older, stronger, dressed in armor that was neither human nor Varnak. His eyes burned with quiet fire. He stood between her and the stone, one arm raised, glowing gauntlet emitting a strange force that held the execution blade suspended inches above her head. The elder shouted. The guards closed in. Kale spoke, his voice deep and calm. By Varnak law, I invoke. Trial by valor. Silence followed. The elder hesitated. One of the Varnak judges stepped forward, confused. That law is forgotten, he said. Kale shook his head, but not gone. The scrolls are clear. If one warrior believes the condemned is worthy, they may fight in her name. Let her prove her truth, not with words, but with action. The crowd buzzed. The judges argued, but the law existed. And now, before millions watching across both worlds, they couldn't ignore it. It's not without breaking their own code. Reluctantly, the trial was halted. The stone was raised. Hallie's cuffs unlocked. She stood slowly, stunned, staring at Kale. You're alive, she whispered. He looked at her, not smiling, "'cause you chose not to kill me." Before she could reply, he turned to the tribunal. "She gave mercy in a war of monsters. Now let the galaxy see if mercy is weakness or strength." The guards stepped aside. The trial was set. They would be taken to the Scarred Moon, a place of old laws and blood games where champions fought for truth. Hallie followed Kale down the steps, her mind racing, her heart pounding, knowing that she had just escaped death, but the real fight had only begun. The ship that carried Hallie, Voss, and Kale away from Varnakar Prime was silent inside, its engines humming like a distant storm as it crossed deep space toward the Scarred Moon. Hallie sat in the corner of the main chamber, her wrists no longer bound, but the weight of the past still heavy on her shoulders. She kept glancing at Kale, unsure if he was real, unsure if she was alive. He stood tall now, his armor shining with both human design and Varnak technology, his face calm but hard, like a man who had seen too much and survived it all. The last time she saw him, he was a slave, broken, bleeding, silent. Now he commanded, attention like a general. "You're different," she finally said. Kale didn't look at her. "War changes people. You taught me that." He walked to the console and activated a map of the Scarred Moon. It looked like a broken planet, cracked with canyons and glowing scars, floating above a dead world. "That's where you'll fight," he said. "The trial by valor isn't just a battle, it's a test of the spirit. 3 trials. One of mind, one of body, one of heart. If you pass, you walk free. If you fail, the Alliance gets what it wants, your death." Hallie took a breath. "And if I don't want to fight?" Kale turned to her, his eyes steady. "Then you've already lost." The Scarred Moon came into view hours later, spinning slowly in the darkness like a wounded beast. The ship landed on a platform carved into the surface, surrounded by towering alien statues. Waiting for them were robed Varnak officials, human observers. In a wide circle of silent warriors, Southern champions, watching, judging, Hallie stepped onto the stone ground, her heart pounding. The Tribunal of Trials stood in the center, 3 Varnak judges and 2 humans, their faces unreadable. One of them, a tall, scarred Varnak with red eyes, spoke. "Hallie Voss, you stand accused of crimes in war. You have been granted a trial by valor. You may name one ally. Do you choose Kale, Virex?" Hallie looked at Kale. He gave a single nod. "Yes," she said. The first trial began quickly. They were led into a wide, circular chamber filled with shifting panels, floating rocks, and zero gravity. "Trial of the mind," a voice echoed. "Survive the maze. Solve the pattern, or perish." Hallie and Kale pushed off the floor and floated into the maze, the world spinning around them. Lights blinked, walls twisted, and deadly traps sparked to life. Kale moved like he had done this before, gliding through the chaos. "Follow the rhythm," he said. The walls shift in a loop. As a path, Hallie trusted him, moving fast, dodging spinning blades and electric fields. Her body ached, her head pounded, but her mind stayed sharp. She remembered patterns from her flight training, rhythms from combat simulations. Time blurred. A sudden shift nearly slammed her into a wall, but Kale grabbed her hand, pulling her through a narrow gap just in time. The maze's heart, a puzzle, weighted 5 stones, glowing with strange symbols. "Only one opens the path," Kale warned. Hallie studied them, remembering old Varnak glyphs. Her fingers hovered, heart racing. Then she tapped the second stone. The floor opened beneath. Dim light filled the chamber. Trial 1 passed. The next trial came without rest. "Trial of the body," the judge announced. They stood in an arena of jagged rocks and harsh winds. Across from them, 2 armored champions appeared, one human, one Varnak, both taller, stronger, armed with energy blades. You fight together, Kale whispered. But stay alive on your own. The fight began. Hallie moved fast, dodging the first strike, grabbing a piece of broken stone to use as a shield. Kale clashed with the Varnak blades, sparking with every blow. Hallie fought the human, a massive brute with a cruel grin. She ducked, rolled, struck low. Pain shot through her ribs as he landed a blow, but she didn't stop. She remembered the war. She remembered the fire. She remembered surviving. With a scream, she drove her makeshift weapon into his leg, and as he stumbled, she flipped him over with all her strength. Behind her, Kale finished the Varnak with a swift strike. The crowd roared. Trial 2 passed, but Hallie collapsed. Blood stained her side. Kale caught her. "You need rest," he said. "No time," the judge replied coldly. "The final trial is now." They were taken to a dark chamber filled with mirrors, lights, and whispers. Trial of the heart. The voice echoed. "Face your past." Hallie stood alone. Kale was gone. In the mirror, she saw herself not as she was now, but as the soldier who once gave orders that led to death. She saw the civilians she couldn't save. The soldiers who followed her to their doom. She heard their voices. "You failed us. You lied. You left me." Her hands trembled. Tears burned in her eyes. The mirror spoke in her voice. "Why did you spare him? Why not save your own?" Hallie fell to her knees, pain crushing her. But deep inside, a voice answered her own, but stronger. "Because mercy matters, even in war." The mirror cracked. The voices stopped. She stood, breathless. The chamber opened. Kale waited outside. The judges rose. "You have passed," they said. "The trial by valor is complete. You're free." But just as the crowd cheered, one of the judges stood. It was the scarred Varnak from before. "This trial was a lie," he growled. "The prisoner is still guilty. The peace demands her death." He pulled a weapon. Guards turned. Chaos began. But Kale stepped forward, placing a chip into the tribunal console. A projection lit the sky footage of the massacre Hallie had been blamed for. The real orders came from the Varnak judge himself. Eric Stahl. Lies exposed. Truth revealed. The crowd went silent. Eric Stahl was seized. The tribunal had no choice but to declare Hallie innocent. She turned to Kale, her voice shaking. "Why did you come back?" He looked at her, eyes full of fire and memory. "'Cause once, when no one else did, you saw me as something more than a weapon. You saw a soul. Now, I see yours." And as the stars above the scarred moon burned bright, Hallie knew her war was not over, but for the first time in years, she wasn't facing it alone. The stars above the scarred moon still burned cold and bright as Hallie Voss stepped into the arena of reckoning, where shadows clung to the stone and every breath felt like it echoed 1,000 times too loud. This was not part of the trial by valor, but something older, deeper. A right reserved for those who had passed the trials and still carried burdens too heavy to hide, a place where honor was settled, not by law, but by choice. And Kale had chosen it, not for himself, but for Hallie. Because while the tribunal had declared her innocent, not everyone agreed. And not every voice had been silenced when the truth of Eric Stahl's lies had been revealed. Some Varnak commanders, old warriors from the war, had called the ruling weak, bending of the spine for the sake of peace, and one of them, Commander Jorax, a legend among the Varnak elite, had demanded Hallie prove her innocence not just in court, but in combat against him, in the oldest tradition of their people, where no tricks, no allies, and no politics could protect her. She could have refused, but Kale had told her the truth. If you walk away now, Tay will never accept you, not in peace, not in war, not ever. And so she agreed, not for herself, but for every soldier who had died, believing she had betrayed them, for the broken trust between species that could still be healed. And maybe, in some way, for Kale, who had risked everything to save her. The arena was deep within the scarred moon, carved into the rock itself, lit only by glowing crystals and watched by thousands in silence. No cheers, no music, just the quiet tension of two warriors preparing to decide something far larger than themselves. Hallie wore simple armor, light but strong, her old Earth Force training suit repaired by Kale with alien alloys, while Jorrax stood across from her, towering, horned, his body scarred from decades of battle, his double-bladed weapon humming with blue energy as he watched her with eyes full of hate, not for her as a person, but for what she represented, a human spared, a truth revealed too late, a peace built on ashes he had sworn to protect. The match began with no signal, only silence, and suddenly Jorrax charged, fast for his size, swinging with brutal force, and Hallie barely rolled aside, feeling the heat of the blade pass inches from her head. She struck back, quick and sharp, her blade catching his side, but he didn't slow. He turned and slammed her with his arm, sending her sprawling to the ground, gasping, ribs aching, but she got up, steadying her breath, remembering Kale's training. Don't match his strength, use his weight, turn his fury against him. And when Jorrax came again, she ducked low and slid beneath him, slicing at his legs, forcing him to turn, to chase, to grow angry. And each time he missed. Each time she made him move more than he wanted. The balance shifted. But still, he was strong, and after 10 minutes of brutal, breathless fighting, caught her arm with a glancing blow, and she felt bone crack. Her sword fell in the crowd, leaned forward, certain it was over. But then Hallie rolled back, grabbed a shard of crystal from the arena floor, and threw it with all her might, striking Jorrax in the eye. He roared in pain, stumbled, and she lunged, grabbing her blade again, her other arm useless, and slashed across his chest, once, twice, 3 times, until he fell to one knee, bleeding but still not yielding. Then came the moment the silence, the law of the arena, allowed her to kill him, to end it, to prove her strength completely. But Hallie stepped back, dropped her blade, and raised her hand, shaking but firm, saying only, "I will not kill." A warrior who fought for his people, even if he could not see the truth. And the arena was still, no one speaking, no one moving, until Jorrax's eyes, burning, slowly stood, looked at her for a long moment, then raised his weapon and drove it into the stone floor beside him, a sign of surrender. The crowd let out a single breath, one unified exhale of surprise and respect, and then the silence broke into thunderous sound, voices calling out in both Varnog and human tongues, not in anger, but in something close to awe. Hallie collapsed, soon after, her arm broken, her side bruised, and Kale caught her before she hit the stone, his face unreadable, though his eyes shone bright with something deeper than pride hope. As they left the arena together, the Varnak elder, who once demanded her execution, stood at the gate and gave a slow, solemn bound low, not deep, but enough, and Hallie nodded in return, feeling the weight of the moment press into her like gravity. She had survived, she had fought, but more than that, she had chosen mercy again, and this time it had changed something, not just in one man or one crowd, but in a fragile galaxy, still unsure if peace could be trusted. And as the stars spun slowly above the scarred sky, Kale whispered beside her, "Now they see what I saw all those years ago, the one who chose not to kill me." Deep the scarred moon's surface, where the light of the arena no longer reached, Hallie Voss walked through cold tunnels that twisted like the veins of a dying world, her broken arm wrapped in a high-tech sling, her every step echoing as if the stone remembered every footfall made by warriors long gone. Kale walked beside her, silent but tense, his hand never far from the pulse blade on his hip. And though the arena had declared her honorable and free, and though Jorahx himself had yielded, something still felt wrong, something deep, something hidden, like a breath waiting to be held. It began the night after the arena, when Hallie tried to sleep, but woke to whispers. Voices speaking in Varnak dialects through the vents of their chamber, names being said in the dark, her name among them, in words like traitor, gate, an awakening that chilled her more than any blade ever had. Kill had heard them too, and when he returned from a quiet meeting with one of his old allies, his face was pale, his eyes darker than she had ever seen. And he said, only, there is a plan, Hallie, and we are not part of it. They moved deeper into the underlevels of the moon, through catacombs that were not on any official map, using a stolen key chip Kale had received from a silent monk who slipped it into his cloak with a trembling hand. And though the monk had said nothing, the look in his eyes said everything: fear and a warning too heavy to speak. As they passed beneath forgotten shrines and ancient glyphs carved into the walls, they came to a wide chamber where the air felt thinner, colder, and at the center stood something neither of them expected: a gate, tall and smooth, made of metal, that shimmered like liquid, covered in runes, both human and Varnak, pulsing with a soft green light, as if it were breathing. Kale stepped forward, touched one of the symbols, and it flickered to life, projecting a faint image: a star map, distant, filled with red circles, and one glowing mark: Earth. Hallie's stomach turned, and she realized what it was: travel gate, a weapon of the old war, meant to send armies across space in seconds, and it was active. This isn't a grave, Kale said quietly. Atia to Doran, someone's getting ready to open it again. Before she could speak, a sudden sound snapped through the chamber: footsteps, many, not hiding anymore. They turned, and from the darkness came a group of Varnak warriors, their armor dark, their faces marked with old symbols of the war symbols that had been banned in the peace agreement, and behind them stood a human, Cod, dressed in a long coat, his face scarred, one eye replaced with metal. Lieutenant Voss, he said with a twisted smile, I see you found our secret too early. Hallie stepped back, shielding Kale's side with her good arm, while the human continued. You thought the war ended? You thought mercy changed anything? No, the gate never closed. The plan never died. You just delayed it. Kale raised his weapon slowly, his voice like steel. You're trying to restart the invasion? You're going to open this and send a fleet to Earth? The man nodded, proud, and said, not just to Earth, to everywhere the Varnak once held. Peace is a lie. War is order. Before another word passed, fighting exploded. Kale moved like lightning, striking the nearest warrior, while Hallie ducked behind a stone pillar, grabbed a fallen blaster, and fired with her good arm, hitting a masked attacker in the chest. The battle was close, brutal, and loud, energy blasts lighting up the ancient chamber like a storm, dust falling from the ceiling as Kale and Hallie fought side by side, her every move timed with his, their bond, unspoken but perfect. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. Kale fought like a ghost, silent and deadly, while Hallie used every lesson from her pilot days, shooting with precision, moving fast, thinking faster. Still, more enemies poured in, and just as one of them grabbed Hallie from behind, dragging her toward the gate, she kicked hard, sent him stumbling, and saw Kale stab his way across the room toward Herb. Too late. The human commander activated the gate, the room shaking with power, the symbols turning red, and, from the glowing frame of the structure, a shape began to form, tall, armored, and wronged, like something built for war and nothing else. That's not a soldier, Kale said. It's a titan. Hallie remembered them from the last days of the war machines of flesh and armor, powered by hate, built to destroy cities in hours. Somehow, they had one, and they were waking it up. Thinking fast, Hallie shot the power node beside the gate, sparked, screamed, and flickered. The Titan vanishing in a glitch of light, the gate groaning like it had been wounded, and suddenly, the chamber began to collapse. "Run," Kel shouted, grabbing her, pulling her as stone crashed down behind them. The traitors fleeing into the dark as the gate failed completely, sending out one last burst of green light that scorched the wall with strange symbols Hallie didn't recognize. They didn't stop running until they reached the upper levels, bruised, bleeding, breathless, and when they finally looked back, the path behind them was sealed, buried under tons of rock. "It's not over," Hallie whispered, her voice shaking. "They're still out there. They have others." That was just one gate. Kale nodded slowly. "And now they know we know. They won't hide anymore. They'll strike soon, unless we strike first." And as they stood beneath the ancient stone arches of the scarred moon, the future of two worlds hung like a blade over them both. Because whatever peace had begun in the arena was now under attack from the shadows beneath the stone. And this time, mercy might not be enough. The city of Hyvarn, carved into the cliffs of the scarred moon, stood silent as dawn broke over its jagged skyline, the pale sun catching the edges of its towers like knives drawn in still air. But within its deepest courts, a storm was gathering, and Hallie Voss stood in chains once more, this time not as a traitor, but as a scapegoat, framed by enemies hiding in the dark, who now moved boldly through the halls of power, twisting truth into lies, accusing her of sabotage, murder, and rebellion. The destroyed gate, the bodies found in the tunnels, the symbols scorched into stone had all been twisted into a story that painted her as a radical who had tried to restart the war. And while Kale fought like fire through council chambers and secret meetings to free her, the traitors moved faster, their roots deep, their voices louder. And now the trial had ended in one final judgment: execution by stone. A punishment reserved for those whose betrayal was meant to send a message, a method as old as Varnak law itself, where a giant slab of obsidian would be dropped from the execution spire, ending a life with a brutal finality before the watching eyes of the people. Hallie was calm as they led her up the long steps, her injuries mostly healed, her heart steady, but her mind burning not with fear, but fury, not for her fate, but for the truth buried by those who feared it. And the thought that if she died here, everything she had fought for would die with her. The crowd below watched in tense silence, not cheering, not crying, just waiting, unsure, perhaps doubting the story, but too afraid to speak against the council. And as the executioner raised his hand, a red flag signaling the moment the stone would fall, Hallie looked up at the skywand. "Last time I had remembered Kale's voice. If they try to kill you again, I'll be there. This time, I won't be late." And then everything happened at once. Scream tore through the air. A flash of light shattered the red banner. And from the sky above, a ship dropped like a hawk, sleek and black. No insignia, no warning, and from it leapt Kale, not dressed in armor, but ceremonial black, bearing the ancient blade of the Varnak High Guard, a symbol of authority no council could deny. And as he landed beside her, the stone frozen mid-release by emergency locks, he raised the blade and shouted words in the old tongue, words that struck like thunder across the square, invoking a clause so old it had not been used in centuries. Trial by revelation. The execution halted, the crowd gasped, and the High Council, seated in their tower, had no choice but to listen as Kale revealed what they had tried to bury dead as shards pulled from the broken gate. It's audio recordings from the underground, names of traitors, both human and Varnak, all sent moments before the rescue began to every news node in the system, exposing the truth to the entire moon and beyond. The blade in Kale's hand burned with light, its edge etched with justice, and as he held it to the sky, the people began to murmur, then speak, then shout, not in anger, but in support, not for war, but for truth. And Hallie, still chained, still marked, felt the tide shift in her bones. The council ordered his arrest, but the guards refused, and then, one by one, officers from both species stepped forward to defend Kale and Hallie, forming a ring around the spire as the traitors above tried to escape, only to be met by loyalists, already waiting in the shadows, thanks to Kale's careful planning and the bravery of those who had not lost hope. The chains around Hallie fell as Kale shattered the lock, and for the first time in days, she stood free, not just by law, but in spirit. And as she looked out over the crowd, she saw something in their eyes she hadn't seen since the war ended belief. Later, when the traitors had been captured, Kay and the false council members removed, Hallie and Kale stood together in the same chamber where her fate had been sealed just hours earlier. But this time, she spoke not in defense, but in command, delivering a message that echoed through every system once touched by war. Peace without truth is a lie, and silence in the face of danger is not peace, is surrender. She spoke of the gates, of the enemy still hiding beyond them, of the need for unity, stronger than treaties and symbols. And when she finished, the council rebuilt, keen, humbled, quiet, nodded, and gave her not pardon, but purpose. She was named Liaison of Earth-Vernac Unity, the first to hold the title since the war. Kel, though he said nothing, stood taller beside her, the blade once used to save her, now sheathed at his side. And somewhere deep below, in tunnels still not fully explored, other gates might still hum, other plans might still whisper. But the stone meant to end her life had never fallen, and in its place rose a voice the galaxy could no longer ignore.